The founding of Israel is one of the most significant events in modern history, not just for the Middle East, but for the entire world. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 marked the culmination of centuries of Jewish yearning for a homeland and decades of political and diplomatic efforts by the Zionist movement. However, it also marked the beginning of one of the world's longest and most intractable conflicts, as the establishment of Israel led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and ignited a series of wars with neighboring Arab states. Understanding how Israel was founded requires an exploration of the historical, political, and social forces that converged to make this event possible. The roots of Israel's founding lie in the Zionist movement, which began in the late 19th century in response to rising anti-Semitism in Europe. Jews in Europe had long faced discrimination, persecution, and violence. But the late 19th century saw a surge in anti-Jewish sentiment, particularly in Eastern Europe and Russia, where pogroms, violent attacks on Jewish communities, became increasingly common. In response, some Jewish intellectuals and activists began to argue that Jews needed a state of their own where they could live in safety and dignity. This idea, known as Zionism, was articulated most famously by Theodor Herzl, an Austrian journalist and one of the movement's founding figures. Herzl and other early Zionists argued that the Jewish people were not just a religious community, but a nation with a right to self-determination. They chose Palestine as the location for this future Jewish state, citing the historical and religious connection of Jews to the land of Israel, where the ancient Jewish kingdoms of Israel and Judah had existed thousands of years earlier. The Zionist movement gained momentum in the early 20th century, particularly after the horrors of the Holocaust, which demonstrated the urgent need for a safe haven for Jews. After World War I, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of new nation-states in the Middle East presented an opportunity for the Zionist movement to advance its cause. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, which expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the time, Palestine was still under Ottoman control, but the British had made significant advances in the region during World War I, and the declaration signaled their intention to facilitate Jewish immigration and settlement in the region once the war was over. The Balfour Declaration was a turning point for the Zionist movement, but it also set the stage for conflict with the local Arab population, who saw the arrival of Jewish immigrants as a threat to their own national aspirations. After World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate to govern Palestine, and Jewish immigration to the region increased dramatically. Between 1920 and 1947, the Jewish population of Palestine grew from about 60,000 to over 600,000, thanks in large part to the support of the Zionist movement, which helped Jews fleeing persecution in Europe to settle in Palestine. The increasing Jewish presence in Palestine, combined with the rise of Arab nationalism, led to growing tensions between Jews and Arabs. The local Arab population, who had lived in the region for centuries, saw the influx of Jewish settlers as a colonial project that threatened their way of life. These tensions exploded into violence during the Arab Revolt of 1936-1939, a three-year uprising against both British colonial rule and Jewish immigration. The British responded by cracking down on the Arab Rebellion, but they also began to limit Jewish immigration in an attempt to maintain order. As tensions between Jews and Arabs escalated, the British found it increasingly difficult to manage the situation. After World War II, the Holocaust and the horrors of Nazi genocide gave new urgency to the Zionist cause. Many Jews who had survived the Holocaust were desperate to leave Europe, and Palestine was seen as their only refuge. However, Britain, which was still in control of Palestine under the Mandate system, was reluctant to allow large numbers of Jewish refugees into the region, fearing that it would lead to more violence with the Arab population. In 1947, Britain decided to end its mandate in Palestine and turn the issue over to the newly formed United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan that would divide Palestine into two separate states, one for Jews and one for Arabs, with Jerusalem designated as an international city under UN control. The Jewish community accepted the plan, but the Arab community rejected it, viewing it as an unjust division of their homeland. This set the stage for conflict. On May 14, 1948, as the British mandate officially ended, Jewish leaders in Palestine, led by David Ben-Gurion, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. This declaration was met with immediate resistance from neighboring Arab countries, including Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, who launched a war to prevent the establishment of the Jewish state. The Arab-Israeli War of 1948, also known as the War of Independence in Israel, was the first of several major conflicts between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Despite being outnumbered and initially under-equipped, Israeli forces managed to win the war, thanks in part to better organization, international support, and a strong sense of national purpose. By the time the war ended in 1949, Israel had not only survived, but had expanded its territory beyond what the UN Partition Plan had originally allocated. This victory was a moment of triumph for the Jewish people, marking the realization of their dream of returning to their ancestral homeland after centuries of persecution. However, the war also created a massive refugee crisis. Around 750,000 Palestinian Arabs were displaced from their homes during the fighting, either fleeing the violence or being expelled by Israeli forces. Many of these Palestinians ended up in refugee camps in neighboring countries, where they and their descendants continue to live to this day. The memory of this displacement, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, is a central part of Palestinian identity and remains a major point of contention in the conflict. The founding of Israel was a monumental achievement for the Jewish people, but it also set in motion a conflict that continues to this day. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just about land, but about identity, history, and the struggle for self-determination. Both Israelis and Palestinians see themselves as the rightful inhabitants of the land, and both have deep emotional, religious, and historical connections to it. This makes the conflict incredibly difficult to resolve, as any solution will require both sides to make painful compromises. Israel's founding was a moment of hope and renewal for Jews around the world, offering them a safe haven after centuries of persecution. But for Palestinians, it was the beginning of a long struggle for justice and recognition. The competing narratives of the two peoples and the deep wounds of the past continue to fuel the conflict and make peace elusive.